Welcome to the Connecting Life podcast. I'm your host, Dianaboskma. Here we connect the dots between health, nutrition, mindset, and everyday life, helping you build a healthier, more fulfilling future, one step at a time. So grab a cup of tea, get comfortable, and we'll dive into today's episode. So today, we're continuing our journey through the Microbiome Spotlight series, and we're turning our attention to one of the oldest fermented foods in the world, sourdough bread. Now, bread is something many of us take for granted. We pick a loaf up at the supermarket, make a sandwich, perhaps toast a slice for breakfast, and we don't really give it much thought. But if we travel back a few hundred years, or even a few thousand years, bread would tell you a very different story. It was never just food, it was a skill, it was a tradition, and it was a daily ritual. And in many households, it was one of the most important foods on the table. So one of the things that I love about sourdough is that it reminds us how patient our ancestors had to be. Today, we just often expect everything to just happen really quickly. Instant coffee, instant messages, Amazon deliveries, everything's instant results. But when you think about the traditional bread, the way it was made, that was definitely not instant. Because sourdough bread, the starter takes time to develop, and then the dough takes time to ferment, and then the loaf just takes time to bake. So it all takes time. And that's, I think, part of its beauty. So for thousands of years, people baked bread without using commercial yeast. Like now you have the quick yeasts. They weren't there. Instead, those people relied on wild yeasts and naturally occurring bacteria that lived all around them. So by simply mixing a bit of flour and a bit of water and then giving nature time to do its work, they created a living starter that could be cared for year after year after year, and we can still do that. Some sourdough starters are said to have been passed through families for generations. Mine not, because I didn't even know about sourdough until I was much older. So imagine baking today's loaf with the same living culture that your grandparents or even great-grandparents used. That's really a cool thought. At least for me it is. And there's something quite interesting about that thought, because it reminds all of us that food can carry stories as well as nourishment. And we've looked throughout this series at how every culture developed its own fermented food. So, in Europe, there was sauerkraut. In Korea, kimchi. Then in the Caucasus Mountains, kefir. And then in Eastern Europe, beet kvass. So in different parts of the world, naturally fermented bread became a staple diet. It had somewhat different ingredients, different climates, different traditions, but all was connected to that idea that time can transform food. So one of the things that I find quite admirable about traditional bakers is their willingness to work with nature rather than against it. And sourdough starters, they change with the seasons. Temperature affects fermentation, humidity affects the loaf and the dough. So every loaf is a conversation basically between the baker, the ingredients, and the environment. So every loaf is different. We make sourdough here, and it's quite interesting to see how every loaf turns out somewhat different. Some have some more poof to it, some have some less poof to it. Some just take so much longer to really get that rise. So it's quite cool to see, quite interesting, because what you really have to do is just watch what's happening. And even with baking the loaves, you can smell when it's finished. You can smell when it's baked long enough, because again there, when there's more humidity, it might take longer to bake. And that unpredictability is for me something that I find really cool, because it means that every loaf is special. And for me, it makes sourdough special. And what I've noticed with talking with friends and stuff like that is that a lot of people are now rediscovering this joy of making your own sourdough bread. And I know for a lot of people it started already well before we had lockdowns and everything. And for others, because they had more time, they started looking into hobbies, so they started looking into baking, and sourdough was one of those. So people are, looking at reconnecting with older skills, seeing what they can do. Some of my friends started doing cheese making, which is also really cool. And for a lot of people, it was about slowing down in life. And that's what we really need to do with sourdough. You need to slow down, you need to pay attention, you need to be patient. And you also need to take care of it like you need to take care of a pet. Because you need to feed your sourdough starter regularly. You need to make sure that it's all doing well. And then once you've gone through all those steps, you end up with something really nice, a whole loaf of bread. And yeah, traditional food preparation, it all reminds us that some of the best things in life develop over time. That's with relationships the same. It's also with skills. You need to put in the time. Confidence grows as you work on it. Communities grow as we work on it. And also a good bread. So most things that are of real value are not created overnight. And perhaps the enduring popularity that sourdough has had over centuries may not be only about the flavor. Maybe it's also about the lessons that it teaches us about simple ingredients, care, taking time, slowing down, and then it becomes something really cool. So I want to thank you again for joining me for this Microbiome Spotlight. I've created a bit of a reference guide where you can see a bit more about what sourdough is. You can download that through my website. I'll share the link in the text below in the description. You'll find some serving ideas, some storage tips, and just some traditional food wisdom, all in one A4. So thank you for joining me, and until next time, take care of yourself, keep nourishing yourself, and remember, sometimes the oldest traditions still have something really valuable to teach us. Till next time.